This year marks the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and tonight we begin a series of reports, not so much on the battle, but on the events that led up to the battle.
Those events affected a lot of communities right here in the Mid-State. Janelle Knight reports.
We learned about it in school. The Battle of Gettysburg, the fighting, the blood and death. It's one of the most famous battles in history, but was actually part of a much larger campaign that went on for over a month.
Gettysburg wasn't a planned battle. It just sort of happened.
The Confederates' invasion of Pennsylvania, specifically the Mid-State.
It's more than the 3 days, and it's more than dates and numbers and numbers of troops in history. It's all about the people.
The Army of Northern Virginia was here to get supplies. When they arrived, they didn't just stay in one place, but spread across to Cumberland, Adams, and York counties.
It was very exciting, I'm sure, and very nerve-wracking. All of a sudden, this was the front. You know, people didn't know what was going on. There were rumors flying about the Confederates about to enter the city. There was, rumors about Confederates fanning out over all of Pennsylvania.
This month, we'll take a look back at what it was like during that time for the soldiers, people who lived in the occupied towns, and the mark these battles made on history. Janelle Knight, ABC 27 News.
And if you're interested in learning more about the Battle of Gettysburg, we have a section dedicated to it on our website. Just go to abc27.com and look under the News tab.
Continuing coverage now of events leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg. It's a decision that could have altered history. The Confederates' original target wasn't Gettysburg, it was actually Harrisburg.
If soldiers stuck with the plan, there could have been a very different winner of the Civil War. Janelle Knight reports.
Well, we all know that Harrisburg is rich in history, but often buried in the footnotes of books. The city's important role during the turning point of the Civil War. It's the focus of a book, The Confederate Approach on Harrisburg, written by 15-year-old Cooper Wingert. Yes, you heard it right. He's still a teenager, and he's one of the leading historians in our area on the Confederate plan to attack Harrisburg, General Robert E. Lee's original target.
So he has to come up here, he has to make a big footprint and convince the Northern public, break their will to continue the war. And capturing Harrisburg, a northern capital, it's strategically, and it's the goal of breaking the will of the Northern public is huge.
Not to mention, it would be an easy victory. The Union soldiers weren't trained.
Most of the men who up here had never seen battle before. Some of them had never fired a gun before. They didn't know how to fire their own guns.
And at Fort Couch in Washington, the terrain was bad.
So if a Confederate shell strikes the earthwork, it's going to shatter rock into the faces of the defenders. So that just makes it worse for these virtually untrained militia.
And they were outnumbered. Confederate General Albert Jenkins was ready, probing the defenses of Harrisburg. But then, an about face. He receives orders to head to Gettysburg. A brutal battle for both sides, killing thousands. But what if the Confederates stuck to the original plan? Here's local historian Jim Schmick.
If they could take a northern capital, would finally the North say enough's enough and ask Lincoln to ask for peace? That's the what ifs.
Historians say remembering the major battle that didn't happen is just as important as remembering what did and the sacrifices made by the men in battle.
No matter how big or small the conflict, the men risked their lives just the same and fought for their country.
Janelle Knight, ABC 27 News.
Leading up to a milestone anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, we've been sharing stories that surround that time in history. And today we focus on the burning of the Wrightsville Bridge.
And the strategy behind it, one that slowed down the Confederates. Janelle Knight and photojournalist Dave Tristan report.
These piers in the Susquehanna River are all that's left of the old Wrightsville Bridge. But back in 1863, it was pretty grand. The world's largest covered bridge, the only one across the Susquehanna from Harrisburg to Maryland. The Confederates wanted to seize it, so the Union Army knew they had to get rid of it. At first, they wanted to shoot it down, but they didn't have enough ammunition for that. So they tried making holes in it and stuffing it with gunpowder and explosives. But that didn't work either.
All the gunpowder did was knock holes in the roof, knock holes in the wall of the covered bridge, but the bridge deck itself, which carried railroad trains for the Pennsylvania Railroad as well as the Northern Central Railway, was too sturdy.
So they had no choice but to burn it. But they only wanted to destroy part of it. But things didn't go as planned.
50-year-old seasoned oak, a mile-long wind tunnel, especially when a windstorm was blowing up from the east, the bridge simply could not be put out.
It took 6 hours for the bridge to burn. So the Union did succeed in hurting the Confederate Army. Some of the soldiers arrived in Gettysburg a day late. But it also hurt the people who lived in the area. Some of the embers from the fire blew onto nearby homes and buildings, and it was actually Confederate soldiers who put those fires out. And we all know what it's like to lose a major bridge to fire. Imagine what it was like 150 years ago. But in the end, the Union Army did meet their goal, and the burning might have altered what happened in Gettysburg.
And so day one at Gettysburg, certainly would be quite different, and one can only speculate on how different it might have been.
Janelle Knight, ABC 27 News.
The countdown is on. In just a few days, the small town of Gettysburg will host an estimated 200,000 visitors.
This to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. Megan Healy has more on what you can expect.
All may be quiet along Gettysburg battlefield for now. But take a stroll downtown, talk to just about anyone, and you'll see the preparations are well underway.
2 people now are making ice cream, even 3, to make sure we have enough product to get out. But yeah, I'm sure town's gonna be packed.
Packed for an unprecedented commemoration of that historic battle, which consumed the very same homes, shops, and church buildings 150 years ago.
I think people are kind of prepared for it.
Katie Lawhon is with Gettysburg National Military Park. She says they've spent the last 2 years planning for this massive event and will more than double their staff over the 9 days.
So this is just one of the many ways the National Park Service is looking to accommodate all of these people. Check it out. It's a mobile cell phone tower that they've brought in so that every single visitor who comes into this park stays connected.
We're using the park's Facebook page and Twitter and YouTube to help get out information about our plans and to have people communicate about what they're seeing, what they're enjoying. And then if we have something like a late afternoon thunderstorm that affects a program, we're going to use that social media to help spread the word.
But even if you aren't planning to make the journey down, you could still get caught in some of the residual traffic. State police want you to know they're doing their part and urge everyone to do theirs too.
You're not going to get anywhere quick down there. We're working very hard to try to make this event as enjoyable for everybody as much as it can be. But no matter what, there's going to be traffic issues. So everybody just has to be patient because we're all in this together.
Working for you in Gettysburg, Megan Healy, ABC 27 News.
Going to be quite a week. Now, the first events of the commemoration kick off this Saturday. We will be there throughout the 9 days, bringing you live reports. We look forward to it.
More than 250,000 history buffs are expected to flood the streets and battlefields of Gettysburg. It's all to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the battle, and the first wave of visitors has arrived. Alex Hoff is live tonight in Gettysburg. Alex.
Flora, traffic volume in and around Gettysburg continues to grow right along with the anticipation. Now, in travel logistics alone, the park has spent more than $1.2 million, and that is just one piece of the sesquicentennial pie. If there is anyone to blame for the full parking lots and maxed out hotels, it's probably these people. They are the first wave of battleground visitors, and it's expected that about 200,000 more are on their way.
The economic impact at the end of this event will be over $100 million.
On the trail, we asked this family if they had contributed to the pot.
A little bit, but not quite as much yet as we probably will through the day.
They're from Maryland and say, in terms of vacations, this is on the affordable side. But how about funding this sesquicentennial?
I had some sleepless nights. We had to struggle to figure out how to do this.
For the 75th and 100th anniversary commemorations, the Commonwealth and federal government picked up a large part of the tab. Not the case this time.
The management of this entire event has been a homegrown effort.
The 500-plus activities have been paid for largely by the Gettysburg Foundation, a nonprofit partner to the park, which takes us back to the trail.
It varies. A lot of people pick on me and want to know about it and why and where. Well, it was just my name.
What we didn't tell you is that this rather inconspicuous visitor is actually kind of a big deal around here.
My name's Robert E. Lee III.
His name is actually Robert E. Lee, and yes, he proved it.
From Mount Airy.
Now, Flora, you have no idea about how wild that was. We were in the middle of a conversation with him before we found out that that actually was his name. And if you want to find characters like that, there is no better place than Gettysburg right now to find them. Now, the first battle is scheduled for Monday, and we're going to be out here working for you all week to bring you more right from the action. But for right now, live in Gettysburg, back to you.
All right, thank you, Alex.
Of course, this all coincides with the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. A commemorative ceremony tonight begins the week-long reenactments of the bloodiest battle ever on U.S. soil, a battle which is often described as the turning point of the Civil War. Alganoza reports.
There were no reenactors, no muskets being fired, but with the use of video, music, and eyewitness accounts from the time, we were all taken back 150 years in time.
And the rocket's red glare.
Trace Adkins sang the national anthem, and author Doris Kearns Goodwin provided the keynote speech. Meanwhile, former ABC News anchor Charlie Gibson talked about coming to Gettysburg as a child and as a student.
And I was always overwhelmed by the serenity and the tranquility of this setting, the gentleness of the hills, the inherent beauty. It seems to contradict the slaughter that occurred here 150 years ago.
It is called the war between the North and the South.
But the central part of the program was the presentation of eyewitness accounts from soldiers and civilians, many of which were children who had to deal with war literally in their backyard.
And rooting out this evil, unholiest of unholy rebellions, and implanting the glorious old banner of liberty farther and firmer into the soil of freedom than ever.
At the end, they played taps and lit candles to honor the thousands of Americans killed here and in the entire Civil War.
And it all closed out with a candlelight procession to Soldiers National Cemetery. Working for you in Gettysburg, Al Ganoza, ABC 27 News.
Now to our continuing coverage of the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. The very first day of the battle was on this day in 1863. Reenactors came ready today with uniforms and gear as tourists from around the world are outfitted with cameras and walking shoes. Dennis Owens begins our live team coverage in Gettysburg. Dennis.
Hello, Alicia. Fortunately, the weather held here today. There were a few sprinkles in Gettysburg, but the dedications and demonstrations went off as planned. I am in Soldiers National Cemetery, and there's media here, not only from around the nation, but from around the world, and a lot of people are talking about the suffering and the sacrifice that went on here 150 years ago, and I think it's fitting that we hearken to Abraham Lincoln's words in this very cemetery when thinking about all the media chattering about the anniversary and what happened in Gettysburg. Lincoln said, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here." They, the soldiers in blue and gray who lost their lives over 3 days in Gettysburg. In fields of ornate and impressive monuments, it is almost nondescript, often overlooked, beside a Gettysburg intersection. But here is where Marcellus Jones of the Illinois Cavalry fired the battle's first shot.
In pulling that trigger, he fires the opening salvo
of what will be the largest battle to take place in the history of the Western Hemisphere.
In Gettysburg, history is not confined to the books. In Gettysburg, history comes to life.
What I am is a lieutenant colonel in rank and denoted by the 2 stars on the collar.
An estimated 15,000 reenactors will tell the story that was originally written by 165,000 soldiers in blue and gray.
It's in my blood. I have very many Confederate ancestors.
Butch Dell lives in Gettysburg now, but was born in Maryland and has been a Confederate for 30 years. On this first day, the gray had its way with the blue, chasing the Union through town. Has he ever added up how much time and money he has spent chasing this passion?
I'm afraid to, but I might maybe have been able to buy 2 houses by now.
I'm obsessed with the Civil War, to the point where it's actually a lifestyle for me now.
Ray Egglestone has spent a small fortune. She's come to reenact from England. She's portraying a male journalist, which also comes at a price.
I even cut my hair. This.
Wow.
It was right down my back on Thursday, and I cut it all off just for this.
Reenactors look real and provide a history lesson, but never quite capture the harsh realities of the carnage, the mayhem, the sheer terror that enveloped this peaceful burg 150 years ago today.
Most of the Gettysburg civilians took shelter in their basements, and there for 2 or 3 days they rode out the storm. They had absolutely no idea what was happening. They could only hear the constant din of battle.
And we've been hearing the din of battle throughout the day as various reenactors fire off those cannons. Now, reenactors, of course, are only part of the equation. You need people to show up and watch the reenactors, and lots of people are indeed coming to Gettysburg. With more on that part of the story, our team coverage continues with our Alex Hoff. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Dennis. We're here on Culp's Hill. This is that spot where you can get one of those really nice audio tours through your car, monument to monument, up this hillside. We have just this beautiful view in front of us. And this is probably one of the last roadways in this area that isn't too clogged up. We've heard it's nearly impossible to get in and out of the downtown right now by car as this anniversary continues forward. 250,000 history buffs are expected to descend upon this small town this week. Because of that, hotels in the area have been booked for the past year, and local businesses are enjoying a monumental boost. The blue and gray grill was packed this morning. They were choosing a side for their burgers is definitely an experience. That means picking one named after either a Confederate or a Union general. Now, visitors traveled from as far away as Denmark and Australia. One family explained why they decided to drive from Alaska to Pennsylvania.
We are American, and this is where we come from and where we originate from. And so we're all one country.
One country indeed. And you know, as much as this traffic might be a pain, especially for the locals who live here, the idea of all of these people coming from all over other countries, all to pay tribute to what happened here and those who gave their lives here, that is something that is absolutely beautiful. Now, Dennis, I'll send it back to you.
And also amazing, Alex. Thank you very much for your report. The estimated $100 million in economic activity that is expected over these 10 days. Alicia Richards, by this time on that night, 150 years ago, some 50,000 troops had been engaged in the battle. But by the end of the 3 days, 165,000 in blue and gray would participate in what would become the bloodiest battle in the history of America on American soil. That's the story. Let's send it back to you.
An amazing battle it was, and thanks to both you and Alex for bringing us those reports, Dennis. And now to our continuing coverage of the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. Today was day 2 of the bloodiest battle on North American soil. Although the South was able to keep sending in waves of men, the Union held on. Dennis Owens is anchoring our live team coverage tonight. Dennis.
Hey, Alicia, the headline is that on this day, the Union Army held. But in the bigger scheme of things, they held the Union together. Of course, tourists are flocking to this historic place, but the fact is, 150 years ago tonight, as day 2 of the battle still raged, you wouldn't want to be standing where I am right now. They are names in Gettysburg legend and lore. The Wheat Field, which in fact was a killing field. Devil's Den, Little Round Top, whose significance was not little at all.
This was very, very important.
Union troops had the high ground and the advantage. Valiant Confederates charged from below and up the hill, wave after wave. Just as valiantly, the 20th Maine under Joshua Chamberlain refused to yield.
When they ran out of ammunition, they initiated a bayonet charge unbeknownst to the Confederates that they didn't have any ammunition, and captured about 200 to 300 and saved the day.
The field is now filled with cars and crowds on foot, even crowds on segways. Ray Shankin of Delaware almost retreated on his bike on the hill in the heat, but was inspired by the Confederates.
It's like, oh, I'm going to get off and walk. It's like, no, I'm not going to get off and walk. These guys, you know, they walked up from Virginia and then stormed the hill, you know, barely ever getting sleep. It's amazing.
Doug Motter expected to battle bigger crowds, but that fight thus far hasn't materialized.
I think a moderate crowd, but nothing that's been gridlocked.
8-year-old Luke Boss brought his gun, his cap, his canteen, and his passion for the Civil War. This is a lot better than a classroom.
Seeing a live thing instead of just reading a book.
150 years later, you can dress like they dress and walk where they walk. But the reality is that on this day, this place was a field of screams.
There was puddles of blood in the rocks. Okay, puddles of blood.
They are doing now.
Puddles of blood and moans and groans. We are told you could hear wounded and dying soldiers groaning throughout the evening, and that could be heard for miles around. As for the people who come here, we are told the average visitor is 52 years old. They will spend a day and a half here on average, and they will spend $465, money that local businesses are working hard to capture. With that part of the story, we turn to Alex Hoff, continuing our team coverage. Hey, Alex.
Hey, Dennis, thank you so much. Yes, the organizers predicted that this area will receive about $100 million by the time everything is over. And businesses want to keep that money right here on the home front, and they're doing that with as little importing as possible. We stopped into Strickland Enterprises silk screening. This Gettysburg business equips half a dozen of their own stores, plus a majority of souvenir shops with official anniversary gear. Local artists even helped design the commemorative logos. Now, down the street at Wells Family Bakery, they have a similar sustainable philosophy. They have met the demands of supplying bread to local restaurants during this busy time while utilizing ingredients from Gettysburg farmers. So when these anniversary spectators go, the revenue will stay.
You know, if we give them our money, they're going to in turn come back in and give us their money, and we just keep it going as a big cycle, and, you know, it works out for better for everybody.
Now, of course, there is some irony in discussing revenue from where I'm standing here on Culp's Hill. Dennis, as you mentioned, tonight, 150 years ago, was the costliest of these three battles in terms of casualties. Over 20,000 killed, wounded, captured, or missing. I'm going to have more from here on Culp's Hill live at 7. Dennis, I'll turn it back over to you for now.
Thanks so much, Alex. We will see you then. And Alicia, you know, for many of the people visiting, it is vacation, it is fun. But it's important to remember that for the men here 150 years ago, it was no vacation and certainly no fun. And for perspective, I am in the Soldiers National Cemetery, where there are 3,500 buried soldiers who died at Gettysburg. For perspective, 3,500 buried here. The town of Gettysburg had 2,400 people living. So this place was more dead than alive at that time. Let's send it back to you, Alicia.
Oh, and over just a couple of days, that hand-to-hand combat. Dennis Owens, Alex Hoff, thanks so much to you. Dennis Owens is anchoring our live team coverage. Dennis, exciting day down there for a couple different reasons.
Yeah, Alicia, up until about 2 hours ago, I was going to tell you that the most climactic moment of the day happened on the ridge behind me. It was called Pickett's Charge. It happened here 150 years ago today. Today, from 3 until 3:30, hundreds of reenactors and thousands of visitors got to retrace the steps of Pickett's men in the field where many of them were mowed down 150 years ago. Confederate General Robert E. Lee ordered thousands of men to attack the northern positions in a last-ditch and last-gasp effort at victory. It was a gamble, and it didn't pay off for Robert E. Lee. There was no violence and bloodshed today, but it made quite an impact on the spectators.
mean, it feels a little bit surreal, especially since, we're all like tourists here, and it's warm, everyone's putting on their sunblock, but to imagine that these were guys who were fighting for days, had marched before that to get here, and just that this whole battlefield was just covered in blood, it was definitely surreal.
That was basically the end of the Battle of Gettysburg. In the three-day bloodiest battle, there were 51,000 casualties here. That's 51,000 men killed, wounded, captured, or missing. 12,000 actually died here. But the town of Gettysburg had just one civilian casualty, and she was an interesting figure in history. We continue our team coverage with Alex Hoff, who has Jenny Wade's story.
The family couldn't stand to hear the calls of the wounded for water. They had to listen to that all day long.
Born Mary Virginia Wade, the 20-year-old was known to sneak out onto the battlefields at night to soothe the soldiers' cries.
One soldier kept the cup she gave him water in for the rest of his life, always remembering how she went out there to help him when nobody else did.
This is a young woman who risked her life on the battlefield, but that is not where she was killed. On July 3rd, 1863, Ginny was kneading dough in the kitchen of her sister's home on Baltimore Street, possibly preparing for another delivery to wounded Union soldiers. She never made it out the door.
She used one of the doors to protect her back, but it failed to do that.
Ginny died instantly. The mark of that shot is still gaping through both doors, filled now with folklore. The lead bullet exited through her heart.
It was unfortunate for her, but it was really miraculous that more civilians did not die.
Miraculous indeed, and there is more legend and lore. It is said that single women who go there and put their finger in that bullet hole in the door will be married, engaged within the year. That's the legend and the lore. Reenactments, observances, all kinds of legend and lore continue here at Gettysburg until Sunday. All kinds of things going on. Folks, you have an amazing piece of history right here in your own backyard. You ought to come out and check it out between now and Sunday. If you can't make it this weekend, make it sometime soon. Alicia, that's the story from Gettysburg 150. Let's send it back to you.
Dennis, you're so right. It is worth another visit and another one after that.
All right, many are spending this 4th of July holiday in Gettysburg for the 150th anniversary of the battle. Now, on this day back in 1863, General Robert E. Lee and his troops retreated back to Virginia, never to return that far north again. But Gettysburg was left with thousands of bodies, and today visitors reflected over the graves of fallen soldiers. Alex Hoff is live in Gettysburg. Alex.
Good afternoon, Flora. 70 years ago, our nation was established with the idea of liberty for all. It was in November of 1863, just a few weeks after the war, that President Lincoln came here. The scent of the dead was still very strong out here. Now, he was called to answer, was all of that worth it? He answered with a 2-minute speech.
53,000 casualties in 3 days.
The war would continue on, but the back of the Confederacy had been broken in Gettysburg. By July 4th, Lee's army had began their retreat to Virginia.
People in town are keeping their windows closed. They are leaving the houses with vials of perfume around their necks. This is a horrible place to be 150 years ago.
It was the horrific souvenir for the winning side. In a town of 2,400, the dead outnumbered the living 3-1 that 4th of July.
For these soldiers who laid down their lives, they deserve a more proper burial.
That month, Pennsylvania Governor Andrew Curtin began the process of creating a central resting place for the Union dead, and a dedication was organized for November.
It will be a place of pilgrimage for our nation.
Christened first by Edward Everett, then by the words of a bearded man.
77 years ago,
our fathers won for us by their blood a new nation conceived in liberty.
Dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure.
We are met on a great battlefield of this war. We have come to dedicate a portion of this field as a final resting place to those who gave their lives that this nation might live.
That, of course, President Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address. Now, he famously said after wrapping that up that he thought that he failed in its delivery, but as you could see, the visitors we spoke with, they knew it by heart. There is still plenty to do out here in Gettysburg. There is a reenactment scheduled, I believe, in the next hour to start. Still plenty of those free tours going on. Everyone we spoke with say it is because of our founding fathers, because of those buried right here, and because of those serving right now, that this here in Gettysburg is the best place to be celebrating Independence Day. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Alex Hoff. Live tonight in Gettysburg.